The Chuckwagon Experience, Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site in Deer Lodge, Montana. A National Park Service ranger stands in front of a wooden wagon with a canvas top. To the left is a line of cottonwood trees in the background as well as some wooden fences. There is a stone fire ring in front of the fence, and a cowboy is working at the rear of the wagon.
Hello, welcome to Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site here in Deer Lodge, Montana. Have you ever camped under the stars? Did you look up into that night sky and look at all those beautiful stars? Did you ever want to keep doing that every night all summer long? Well, if so, you might have a little idea of what it was like to be a cowboy. Behind me is a chuckwagon. Chuckwagons were wooden wagons with these canvas tops. There's also some cottonwood trees over here. My name's Ranger Crystal. Today let's learn a little bit about these cattle drives and these chuckwagons. I do see that there's a cook here today. I wonder if he'd be willing to share some stories with us about cattle drives.
Come and get it!
Hey Cookie, would you be willing to take a few minutes and talk to us about some chuckwagons?
Yeah, I'd love to. I just got done cooking, so I'm about ready to sit down and talk for a little while.
Sure, great.
Yeah,
Let's share some stories.
The ranger and Cookie are sitting around a stone fire ring with a campfire burning. Behind them are cotton trees and a wooden fence.
So Cookie, there's a lot of people that have some questions about what this experience would have been like as a cowboy here on a cattle drive at the Chuckwagon. So the first question most people want to know is, what was a chuckwagon and where did it come from?
What was a chuckwagon? Well, chuckwagon was a pretty important fixture out there on the open range, especially for cowboys, because when the whole open range started back right after the Civil War ended in 1865, well, Texas cowboys started pushing their cattle herds up north, and they wanted to take them all the way up to Montana. Well, that's kind of a long trip, isn't it? That's about 1,500 miles to go up that way. You got to take all your own food with you, so they got to do that. The problem is, when they start doing all this stuff, they just got little ox carts with them, pulled by, a couple oxen, which are kind of like cattle, but they move pretty slow. You can't really keep up with the cattle herd too well using that thing. Or maybe if you're a cowboy, you got yourself a couple saddlebags or a couple sacks that you just hang off a mule or something. The worst part about it really was that you can only fit so much food in there.
Ooh, so they're hungry quite a bit then.
Well, you'd probably be hungry too if you're up in the saddle for hours and hours and hours all day long, probably longer than you're in school all day. But these guys, they got to eat 3 real good hearty meals every day. And the biggest problem was there's no towns on the way. They're spaced really far apart. They're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. So you could go even a month without hitting the next resupply point. We can also move a lot faster with our cars and things, but those cattle herds, they were moving herds of about 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle. And they can't move very fast, maybe about 10 or 15 miles a day.
Oh, that's pretty slow.
Yeah, you can't cover a whole lot of territory doing that. You got to take your time. So they needed to have something that could carry a lot of food with them and last an awful long time. That's why a Texas rancher named Charles Goodnight invented the chuckwagon here in 1866. See, he took an old army wagon, specifically an old army wagon, because the thing has iron axles on it, and you could put grease in there. So it runs a lot smoother, a lot faster. And plus, being an army wagon, kind of, think about army cars and tanks and stuff today, they can really take a beating out there. And they're going over a lot of broken land, a lot of rocks and scrubby bushes and everything. So he took that, and then he added some things onto it. He added a water keg on the side, so in case they hit a stretch of country where there's no water whatsoever, they'll have a little bit they could hold in reserve.
That was a smart idea.
It sure was, because you get out there in the middle of the prairies, aren't that many lakes and ponds and things. So you can go for a few days without seeing water.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the wagon, he also added on what they call the jewelry box. Jewelry box is pretty important because it held kind of like jewelry boxes hold really important stuff for us today. Well, the important stuff for them was all the tools, so they could have axes to chop down wood if they needed it for the campfire. They have things to, if a horseshoe comes loose on one of their horses, they got to have tools to fix that out there. They got to have tools to fix the wagon itself if it breaks down, because back then, across that country, there's no tow truck coming out to help you. Not a thing out there for hundreds and hundreds of miles. But the most important thing he added to that chuck wagon was what they call the chuck box. Now I'm using that word, chuck. It's kind of like a cowboy slang word for food. So basically you're calling it a food wagon and a food box. Chuckwagon was designed to hold a 1-month supply of food. That thing is going to get you a lot further along to that next resupply tent or resupply point.
In the month that you're going to be serving food out of this Chuckwagon, or that it holds a month's worth of food, how many guys can you serve in this month?
Depends on the size of the cattle herd. If we're moving a herd of 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle, probably going to need a crew somewhere between 10 and 15 cowboys. So you got 10 and 15 cowboys living out of this thing, basically.
That's a lot of men.
That's a lot of guys, but it's going to take that many. Although, if you look at a big herd of about 2,000 cattle, it doesn't seem like that many guys to have out there. I got to get up in the morning, got to feed them to breakfast, I got to make sure they got their midday meal, which we call dinner. That's the midday meal. I think today we call it lunch. Supper is the last meal of the day, and I'm in charge of doing all 3 of those meals for them.
So what time do you have to get up in the morning to get all this going?
And I got to get them up about 3:30 in the morning.
It's still dark at 3:30 in the morning.
It sure is. I ring the bell, so I get them up in the morning, but I like to I need to have breakfast cooked for them already. And I got to get the coffee up because that's the first thing they want in the morning. So I ring the bell, then they just crawl out of their bedrolls, put on their boots, get in the chuck line. That's what we call it. It's you line up for your food in the morning. They call it a chuck line.
It's kind of like in a cafeteria.
Yeah, kind of like in a cafeteria when you line up for your food.
Where did you find fuel? I mean, we have a few trees behind us here today, but most of this valley doesn't have a lot of trees in it. So where did you get your fuel for your fires to cook with?
Well, there are a few options that you can have. One, if you happen to find a timber line with trees there, and usually out on the prairies, maybe you'd find cottonwoods like this growing out that way. If you had the chance, we've got axes in the wagon. We keep those in the jewelry chest. Take those out, chop it down. And then you want to take it with you because a lot of stretches out there, and if you've ever been across the prairies, across the Great Plains in the middle of the country, one thing you don't see a whole lot of out there are trees. So usually what they would have to do is if they came across some wood, the cook or the horse wrangler would get the job of chopping it up into smaller bits with an axe, and then they store it underneath the chuck wagon. They would stretch out a skin underneath it, and they had a whole bunch of different names for it. One, they call it a possum belly because if you know anything about opossums, well, they're the only marsupial in North America, so they've got that pouch underneath their belly. That's why they call it that.
Kind of like a hammock, maybe.
Kind of like a hammock for firewood. You think about it like that.
So wood, is there any other fuel source that you had available to you?
Certainly was, and you're probably using this fuel more often than not. Well, since you're surrounded by cattle herds out there, they eat a whole lot of grass while they're out there.
Yeah.
And a lot of that grass comes out the other end. Since, cattle droppings, since it's all basically grass, it burns pretty well. The horse wrangler would usually help out the cook doing this. Tell them to go out and get them the round browns or the fresh ones because they tend to burn a little bit quicker.
That's got to smell really nasty, though.
It's not too bad. It usually smells more like burning grass than anything else.
Does that affect the flavor of the food, though, you cook on it?
I haven't noticed that it really does. Nah, not really. Not really. Probably more because of the stuff that I use to cook the food with.
So not like when someone puts special wood on their barbecue to flavor their meat. It's not doing that same process.
No, not usually smoking it because it's usually cooking. All the cooking that I do over the fire, I don't have like a rack or like a barbecue going over the top of the fire. I'm using something special. That's probably think of it like a microwave today, but we call them Dutch ovens.
Okay.
So it's all enclosed. So it's got a big heavy lid on the top, so a lot of that smoke and stuff isn't getting in there.
They didn't have hotels to stop at. How are these cowboys sleeping? Are they sleeping inside the bed of the wagon?
Nobody sleeps inside that wagon. Nobody sleeps underneath the wagon either. Now,
Well, that was that possum belly's hanging
possum
under
belly
there.
would be hanging underneath there, so you wouldn't really have a whole lot of space.
Right.
And most cooks were pretty particular too. They wanted to make sure cowboys weren't spreading dirt and filth all over the place, especially when they're cooking food. So sometimes they would actually throw stuff underneath the wagon so cowboys wouldn't crawl underneath there and try to sleep, especially if it was raining or snowing at night, because there was no tents. Cowboys didn't have tents with them.
Yeah, I mean, most people when they go camping today, they're either in an RV or a motorhome or a tent.
Usually, yeah. So you got to think about camping out here. in rain or snow, and there's nothing over your head. Cowboys, the only protection they got was from their bedroll.
So what was a bedroll?
Well, a bedroll is, if you've ever seen a sleeping bag before, it's kind of like a sleeping bag, but it's just a giant canvas sack that's about the same size as your body. And cowboy would usually keep a really thick quilt in there that he called a sugan. And that would be enough to keep him warm, and the canvas would kind of keep enough of the moisture off him at night. But usually, if it's really pouring down rain, you're going to get wet anyway.
That's true.
But if you're tired enough, you learn to sleep through it.
Hollywood movies also love to show blankets tucked up on the back of their saddles, and like that blanket is their bedroll, is how they describe it. Is that about what a bedroll would have looked like?
No, those bedrolls were huge because again, you've got that huge, really thick quilt inside of that with more blankets in there. So in those movies, you see the blanket is rolled up to maybe about what, like this. So it's
like
maybe
just
about,
a log, maybe.
it looks like a little log that's about 6 inches thick or something like that. No, these bedrolls will be huge. They'd be probably closer to 2 feet across when they're all rolled up. You can't fit that on the back of your horse.
I was going to say, my horse would tire out trying to carry something.
Oh,
like
would. They're going to be tired enough just carrying you all day long.
So that's why they had to get put into the Chuckwagon.
That's why, yeah, they got thrown in there.
So all the necessities of life were provided by this rolling wagon.
Everything you can imagine out there. If you're sick or you get hurt, Chuckwagon is the only hospital that you're going to get out there. If your hair gets too long or you got a scruff on your face, this is the only barber shop that's there. If something happens to the wagon itself, the wheel falls off, there's no tow truck coming to get you. This is it, right here.
So this really would bond these cowboys together, truly as a team. Very much a social group that you do rely on each other. You probably knew each other very well after 6 months on the road together.
Well, that's what made this wagon so much more than just the place where you come to get your food. This wagon was home for them out there. This is where you know you're going to come to at the end of the day and find your fellow cowboys, your companions out here, to find just that comfort and that companionship while you're out there in the open range, because you're not going to get it from anywhere else.
Credits: Ranger Crystal Tongish, Cookie Quinn Gilly. Filmed on location at Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site in Deer Lodge, Montana.